One of the most important parts of FFT principle about matching the treatment that we offer to the family. There are really three different characteristics that we can match to in the family that make FFT fit the family even better. And remember, the logic here is the degree to which we can wrap our treatment around the family, match it to their culture, their values, and how they work, the better likelihood we will have in engaging and motivating them and helping them be successful with the changes they want to make. Three features. First, the developmental stage of the family. As we've talked about, families with young kids have very different risks and needs and features that are important to them than families with adolescents or young adults. Secondly, current risk. Current risk is part of the context of the family that will help us identify what's pressuring them, what's pushing on them, what's their biggest challenges, and what are their biggest risks for the future functioning of the family and the people in it. Risk is an important contextual feature that helps us understand the degree of emotion, the degree of importance the family may put on things, and the degree of importance that stakeholders around the family are putting on particular activities that they engage in. Third, relational functions. This is the degree to which the family is glued together. And remember, as we've talked about, relational functions are our version of attachment, and it's a way of looking at the degree to which families and dyads within the families are glued together in terms of relatedness, their closeness or contact, and their distance and their independence, and hierarchy, the degree of influence. Matching also means matching, as I said earlier, to the developmental status of the family, matching to the current risk level, and matching to meanings, problem definitions, and matching to relational functions and the structure of how that family works. Development, risk, the meaning and the words and the problem definitions, the exact issues that are important to the family, and then their structures around their relational functioning. Matching means all of these things. This is where the creativity of you, the interventionist and the therapist, comes into play. Can you adjust what you do based upon the family according to these four areas? Now, we've talked about relational functions before, but relational functions are a within family factor that's important to use in matching to them. This is a bit like the personality of the family in a sense. This tells us about the degree to which they're intertwined, psychologically interdependent or independent, who has influence and who has control. Those are structures that go beyond any single event. Those are structures that are pretty constant in a family. Therefore, if we're providing something in our treatment that runs against that, we're just making it even more difficult for the family to be successful. If we match functions, on the other hand, we make it more likely that they're able to be successful at changing the behaviors that they're involved in our treatment in order to help with. Matching relational functions can happen at every phase in FFT. It can happen in the engagement motivation phase. What that means is when you're doing reframing and developing relational organizing themes for the family, you can talk about those themes in ways that fit the experience of the family. What I mean by this is that in describing the theme, if they are a family with a high degree of relatedness, you may use much more emotion words. You may use adjectives and adverbs that talk about the importance, the emotion, the deep felt sense that may be involved in this particular issue. If they're a family that's much more disengaged or much more psychologically distant from one another, you probably want to downplay the emotional importance and instead talk more about facts. These simple ideas in reframing and organizing themes, adjusting the adverbs and the adjectives with which you describe the very same themes to one family, and adjusting those adjectives and adverbs in a different way to fit the degree of closeness or distance or hierarchy in a second family, is where creativity in FFT occurs. Third, you can also match to the family by matching behavior change interventions or by putting into practice those skills they're learning in other treatments in a way that matches to the family. Again, think about it. For a family that is a 5 or relatedness like they are very intertwined, you want to make sure that whatever behavior change skill you're using in the high risk category, in the high risk track, make sure that it has a high degree of intensity, that it's frequent, that there's a lot of quantity to it. And the other end of the continuum is also true for a family in which they may be a 1 or 2, where the dyad is much more psychologically independent. In behavior change, you can reduce the psychological intensity, frequency, and quantity in order to fit that relational function. The very same thing can happen in the final phase, in the generalization phase, where you're generalizing, maintaining, and supporting. You keep a theme, and that theme of relatedness becomes part of everything that you do. In each of the phases, depending on the nature of the relational attachment or function between the family members, you can adjust 3 features on any reframe, organizing relational theme, or behavior change implementation, or topic of generalization. You can make it more or less psychologically intense. And what I mean by that is you can use emotional words, you can talk about the emotional part, you can talk about the impact it has on someone, and you can embellish the emotional and the psychological part, or you can remove that. The content in both remains the same. The only thing that's changing is the way in which you're delivering that reframe or that theme. And in one case, you're delivering it with more intensity by using language and words and embellishing in a way that fits that. And in the other end, you're using it with less intensity. The same thing can happen with frequency and quantity. Frequency is a number of times you do something. So with families very intensely engaged with one another or with high degrees of relational function, I may do something very often, small bits here, small bits there, and do it really frequently because it attends to that kind of need to be involved in the psychological intensity of what goes on. For a family that's less so, I might have things happen less frequently. And the same thing works with quantity. Quantity describes the amount of what happens when it occurs. Whether it takes 5 minutes or a half an hour or 2 hours, you can adjust those time frames, how long people talk, how long they negotiate, how long they problem solve. You can adjust all of those things based upon the function. So in each phase of FFT then, your relational function assessment will guide not necessarily what you do, but it will help guide how you do that by the degree of intensity, the degree of frequency, and the degree of quantity involved. Let's talk about matching to the developmental status of the family. We've talked about it a little bit before, but the notion here is that because in the work with young children, adolescents, and young adults, it becomes really important to see where they stand because the challenges and the issues facing families at these different developmental status points is important. By knowing and by pinpointing where they are in the developmental change process or the family status change process, what we're able to do is ahead of time identify what's relevant and important to them and tailor what we have to say to those issues. Now, the core principles of FFT stay the same regardless of where they are in the developmental spectrum. So with small children, we're still doing an alliance-based intervention with the same that we're doing with adolescents and with young adults. But what changes, again, is the way you deliver FFT-TCM and the topics you may focus on to do that. With small children, of course, you want to talk about basic parent education management strategies that are fair, that are safe, that are healthy. With adolescents, it becomes all about alliance-based strategies to involve their emerging voice in the process of deciding. And for young adults, it has to do with deciding who, when, where, and how one will reach out and with what skills. Again, what you do remains the same. Development and understanding where that family is in its developmental status and developmental kind of development, that's what allows you to better tailor FFT-TCM in whatever phase to that stage. Think about it this way. Families are in a context, and with young children, again, remember, it's these risk factors. It's being safe, it's being healthy, it's learning how to manage and struggle through the complexities of being a parent, managing what that individual caretaker has to accomplish, maybe at work and in their own personal life, along with the family. It's a difficult balance. It's a common child welfare referral. That focus is very much a parent education focus, helping them become safe and healthy parents. We know with adolescence that changes quite a bit. And with adolescence, with this emerging voice, it's all about alliance then. It's all about helping involve them. It's all about teaching them how to be a good adult, teaching them how to participate in the relational processes and the skills needed to work things out as a responsible person in a family. And again, as young adults, that's quite different in the sense that, first of all, we have to find out who their family is, connect to that family, and help them use skills in terms of maintaining the support, maintaining the help that they get from those systems around them. Matching to risk level. Matching to risk is incredibly important because risk is a contextual feature that will help us understand much of the behavior that's being exhibited by caretakers and kids. When there is a risk of maltreatment, out-of-home placement, domestic violence, or mental illness, the stability of the family is threatened. There are 3 types of risks that we identify, and these risk categories were identified in the early risk assessment, and they're asked and they're followed through on your progress notes so that you can continue to monitor them. First of all, of course, there's individual risk for each person in the family. There's their mental health status, their use of substances. For caregivers, there's the strain that they feel. For both caregivers and youth, there's the trauma they've experienced and the current symptoms they continue to experience. And then with adolescents and young children, there's also the strain and the challenge that comes from difficult behavior and difficult to manage behavior in the family. Individual risk applies to caretakers, to youth, and to children. Family risk. Within the family, there are different categories that make it risky for everybody. And when I talk about risk, I mean put the family at risk of coming apart, not staying stable. Domestic violence, child abuse and neglect issues, family functioning and the ability to work things out every day all contribute to the level of family risk. Those families where neglect is an issue, these families are at risk the same way that a family with domestic violence is at risk. And the same thing, the same manner in which a family struggling just to keep stable and stay together is at risk. Third, community or contextual risk has to do with those systems around the families and the individuals in the families. That may, in fact, be involvement in the child welfare system, because by being involved in the child welfare system, what comes with that involvement are a lot of requirements, things that you have to keep up with, and you're monitored and you're checked, and your success in getting through and keeping your family together depends to the degree upon which you're able to fulfill those requirements. The same thing in juvenile justice, the same thing in adult criminal justice, the same thing in educational factors. Community risk are those factors around the family that's pressuring them, that's making it difficult for them, that is a challenge for them, and that threatens their stability. By thinking through individual, family, and community risk, FFT therapists are able to anticipate the important areas to talk about in the family, anticipate the important things to monitor, and anticipate the important areas to intervene to help. With risk, we don't necessarily change what we do, we change what we pay attention to and how we deliver that. Always pay attention to risk, go to risk, adjust for risk, and intervene to alleviate family risk. During treatment, you're going to continue to manage risk. You're going to continue to assess risk, and you're going to use that each session, because you'll make risk assessments each session, to determine how to deliver the particular goals of that phase that you need to deliver. What you're going to adjust are a number of different things. For example, you might adjust the frequency with which you deliver sessions. You may hold them not once a week, but twice or 3 times a week. You may adjust the intensity of a session, moving it, making it more focused and more purposeful, focusing on the most difficult features when there's high risk so that we can get some resolution to those. Third, it may be that you do additional assessment. You may do additional violence assessment, domestic violence assessment, or mental health assessment based upon what you see. That helps you get a sense of the degree, the depth, and the breadth of the risk. You may ask for and get more frequent supervision. Sometimes when it's a high-risk family, having a lot of eyes on the case really helps. You may add additional treatment services, for example, psychiatric care for a med check, other types of specialized treatment services. And with risk with a case that's ending, you'll most certainly refer them to continued services that's particularly designed to meet those risk areas. And you want to look for additional ways to support with the practical help when those risk areas are basic needs. You'll always measure risk. Every time you see them, you're going to be measuring risk. And on the progress note, there is a measure of risk, and high risk will generate for you a clinical alert. You can also, in Care 4, use what we call incidents. And it's important to use an incident to report something very specific that's gone on that's a high-risk situation. Incidents get reported to supervisors and to yourself, and we keep track of them, so it's important to know about them. Remember, with risk, don't change the phase goals. Change what you talk about and how you talk about it. All of these matching features, whether it's matching to risk, whether it's matching to developmental status, whether it's matching to relational functions in the family, these all represent the precision behavioral health approach that FFT-TCM is based upon. Remember, the notion here is that this model has a treatment planning arc and a measurement arc, and that they interact to be able to provide you with the most important information you have at every step along the way. Identifying risk, developmental status, identifying family functions within the treatment planning process, and then double checking to see that what you've changed and altered and adjusted is working for the family through their weekly measurement. That's a precision approach. Try something new, see how it works, adjust and adapt again.